since we last met. Talking about the economy, talking about personal finance items, talking about consumer news, it's a wide range of topics. Let's start with the big picture. Remember when we had the first class for this semester, we talked about that we're going to cover through the 3 classes several of these big news topics. Not always in the same class, but through the semester we will talk about some of these big overarching economic and money items, including the continuing expansion, the 10-year expansion of our economy, international trade, the unrelenting California housing affordability problems, technological and economic disruptions that are occurring at a very fast pace, and the rapid pace of new product and entertainment options and personal technology, hardware and services that are being introduced into the market. I'll give a demonstration on one just today. Alarming healthcare and pharmaceutical costs, and hopefully some fun items as well. So let's start with international trade. The U.S. continues to run an international trade deficit. Economists generally view international trade deficits as not a bad thing. Not necessarily a bad thing, just an indicator of what's happening. How much exports are you sending from your country, both in terms of goods and services, and how much you're importing into your country? Free traders would say that the consumers benefit and businesses benefit when they get the best product at the best price that they can import in, and if they're in the manufacturing business, add value by putting those components into an item they eventually sell to the American consumer. We had on Friday phase 1 of a China-U.S. trade deal, except for a couple of news stories that came out afterwards. First of all, the Chinese have not necessarily said there was a deal made. So that's kind of a bad sign when you negotiate with someone and they said, well, we made progress. Some commentators have called it a nothing burger, or progress, but not necessarily, we're not there yet. Though farmers would receive, food producers in America, farmers and meat producers would say it was a big deal, except that it's not clear that that is not still aspirational, an aspirational level of trade, rather than an actual level of trade. And the price of those products and what products they might be were not disclosed. Now, the detail of phase 1 on something that the president described as, because he talked about 3 phases, is to be finalized by the time he meets with the head of China in about a month at another international conference. They are, in the meantime, the president has delayed increasing the level of tariffs on China. Some have been very cruel, actually, that China may have gotten the best of the U.S. out of this phase 1. Not an increase in tariff, somewhat of a lessening of tension. We'll see. I'm sure the president doesn't like to look like he didn't win the deal, so that may create some counter motion the next time we get together with the Chinese to work out the details, that now we have to win something in order for the headlines to look good. Global prosperity and the global economy very much is affected by these global deals. Few economies are as consumer-oriented, few large economies are as consumer-oriented as the American economy. That is, a lot of our economic progress and our prosperity at the family level, let alone at the business level and the national level, is based upon the robustness of the American consumer buying things. Some economies, not only the Chinese, but economies such as the Germans, are very much dependent upon an exporting their products to other countries. And the Germans, for example, are notorious about being savers, not wanting to, putting money back in the bank and not buying things as robustly as Americans, so that the domestic market for imports in Germany is quite constrained. The International Monetary Fund we'll look at in a revised forecast they recently made, like yesterday. One thing that has been occurring is that it has affected these trade discussions that have now reached 1 year in duration, the serious stage of it now between China and the U.S., 1 year, has led to less trading with China, and certainly not the increase in American manufacturing that had been hoped. And there's reasons for that. It used to be, after World War II, the U.S. was dominant in the world in terms of our economic power. We consisted of more than half of the worldwide national products. I mean, the world, if you measure the gross domestic products in all the world, the global product economy, we were 1/2 of it after World War II. Nothing like coming out on the best end of the war and what happens. And countries like the United Kingdom that had gone so heavily in debt to finance their war effort, let alone Germany and Japan. Now, if no two countries were not with us at Normandy, it was Germany and Japan. Germany and Japan came out very poorly. They were devastated, let alone France and the Low Countries of Europe. So we were the dominant economic power. We're not the dominant economic power anymore. We are a dominant military power. We're a dominant political power, but we're not a dominant international power. There are a number of, it's a multipolar world. There's the Chinese, there's America, the other Asian economies, such as Japan and South Korea, the European community, and the rest of the so-called developing world, including Brazil and Russia and India. So what we can expect, I think, and when I read a lot that would seem to point in this direction, however our battle with the other world large economies turn out, however that turns out, it is unlikely to be a big win for any economy. And it's possible that it can be a big loss for all the economies. So when we talk about global trade, it doesn't mean a whole lot for us in the short term, but it may have a big impact on the long term. Some say that it was the Chinese who took the world out of the 2007-2008 by stimulating their economies and continued to stimulate their economy during that period. And to such an extent they were able to completely weather and really do well in that. The Wall Street Journal reported that the Chinese consumer is starting to look at other products than the American products. That Chinese consumers liked American products because of our culture, our entertainment world, seeing those products advertised or promoted or depicted, now looking at other products, either domestically in China or worldwide. And China is also apparently moving more and more towards a consumer economy. That's where you kind of want to be. You want a mixed economy in which primarily it's your domestic consumers are providing the demand for the products, and you have a large part of the manufacture and deliver of those products in your country. And China is moving more and more to a consumer economy. This chart also depicts that in terms of monthly retail sales. Look at retail sales, what consumers do. Think of going to a department store or buying a car. And you can see that essentially now the Chinese economy, one, because of the very large population they have, is essentially has the same retail demand for products now as the U.S. economy. Wall Street Journal reported the biggest drops in market shares for foreign products in China included 78% from 2009 to 2018, a 78% decrease in non-Chinese smartphones, 15% decrease in video games, 13% decrease in passenger vehicles, 8% decrease in market share in pet foods and other watches. One thing you can't just manufacture yourself out of a problem is food. You have to have food. And the Chinese middle class are demanding a variety of food. The days of a rice-only diet will be behind most Chinese consumers. As a matter of fact, and it may be this year, will be the first year in which the U.S. will export rice to China. The U.S. will export a small but important and symbolic share of the Chinese rice demand. Because I think China has realized that food is a low margin business. You know, as long as you get the food to the people and the water to the people, you know, you can specialize in higher value consumer and industrial products that stimulate the economy more. Think about us in America, only 2% of our labor force is in agriculture, and we feed not only ourselves, but much of the world. Okay, let's move on to another area of trade, and that's the agreement that was negotiated with Mexico and Canada to supersede the NAFTA agreement. That is a treaty requiring approval by both, a trade agreement that requires approval by both houses of Congress for different reasons. In the House because of the taxation impact, and in the Senate because it is in effect a treaty or treaty-like. We talked before about how organized labor wanted to replace the NAFTA deal. and was a major political force for pushing the country towards rejecting the previous agreement with those two other countries that we share a continent with. And they support in principle the new agreement, but not the details yet. And they want more enforcement mechanisms to protect American workers. Organized labor says this is a great deal of if your business, it's a bad deal for workers. So they're very close to a new deal, a deal that would implement in Mexico new labor rights so that the Mexican worker who competes against the American worker will have the same rights, the same economic incentives as many American workers. So we're getting close to a deal there, but no deal yet. Brexit, the British, Great Britain moving out of the European community. There's been progress, and there may actually be a deal. Thursday probably is one of the key dates. That's when the leaders of Europe, leaders of the European community, including the United Kingdom, will meet and hopefully make the deal allowing the UK to exit, and exit under terms that both the European community and the UK can accept. There apparently was progress overnight, and we'll see what happens. That will be a good news to the world in terms of the investment community and make people feel a little bit more comfortable with what's going on in the global environment. Yes, Jim?
Mike, with regards to the Brexit and the Irish border,
yes.
Is there an answer to that problem? Is there?
Well, apparently they're getting close to it. As Jim pointed out, one of the key sticking points has been the Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland. Northern Ireland being part of the United Kingdom, and the Republic of Ireland being an independent country within the European community. And a major stumbling block would be goods and people coming across that border. And that has led to a number of defeats for Prime Minister May's government. And apparently they're getting towards a formulation that the Republic of Ireland is that basically has a veto right. Well, it does. Everyone has to agree in the European community to let the Brits out. Are getting close to a deal. So we'll see what that is. That will be very important. It also will show that you can negotiate things. You can find solutions. And hopefully that will also lead to some comedy, so that with a C-O-M-I-T-Y, not comedy, regarding the U.S. and the European. Our government is trying to negotiate a trade deal with the European community under the threat that if they don't agree to a deal, we'll start imposing higher and higher tariffs on automobiles from Europe. Of course, that's like a dagger to Germany, and that comes up. The next deadline on that is mid-November, so we may go from one trade challenge to another. Part of this with the European has to do with how much do we subsidize Boeing and how much do the Europeans subsidize Airbus. There's basically in the world two major airplane manufacturers, two giants. The Chinese haven't been able to break into that effectively. Brazil has attempted around the edges, but it's really a duopoly, two major manufacturers. The U.S. has won a World Trade Organization complaint against the European community for subsidizing Airbus. There is another one working through the system in which the U.S. is likely to lose about subsidies for Boeing. The Boeing subsidies include state and local subsidies that we have paid. Our state of Washington has paid to keep Boeing in Washington, and that's included as a government subsidy as well. So, it's tit for tat. We can impose now in the World Trade Organization certain tariffs to punish the European for subsidizing Airbus, but soon they will have the same to impose tariffs under the World Trade Organization rules on us for Boeing. So we have some conflict still there. Remember, the European community, particularly when you include the Brits or even without the Brits, is roughly the same size of an economy as the U.S. economy. So you're dealing with another large economy. We did make a trade deal with Japan, phase 1 of a trade deal with Japan. That deal, which had many elements of the Trans-Pacific Partnership in it. Remember the Trans-Pacific Partnership, the deal negotiated by the Obama administration and the other non-Chinese nations in Asia, including Australia. Parts of that was brought over to this new Japan trade agreement. But it's only phase 1. Had nothing to do with automobiles or other major competitive threats to America, but does have elements that helps the service economy and digital currency, the digital economy, including digital services and software. Okay. There's one trade war that we're not part of, and thank goodness. It's between two of our allies, South Korea and Japan, that seems to be spinning out of control with each country relitigating World War II. And they are starting to put economic sanctions on each other. Again, they are big enough economies that when they fight, the rest of the global economy is affected. So we'll see what comes out of Japan and South Korea. This article in the Wall Street Journal pointed out that it used to be the U.S. polled the world economy. If the U.S. had got a cold, the world economy went to the hospital. Now the world economy can have some of that effect on us. If they become stagnant, it can have an impact on the U.S. economy because we've become a smaller and smaller share of the global economy. We talked in our other class about how the American industrial sector is now in a classic recession. Two economic quarters with manufacturing output lower than the quarter before, with negative growth. And that stands out more and more now. The International Monetary Fund has reduced their forecast on global output and American output during this year and next year. Now, the employment picture has both picked up and slowed down. So how do you do that? Well, less people looking for work and it can have a positive impact on the number of people who are unemployed. But all signs still point to slowing of employment. But we're still an envy of the world that the number of people we are employing, we're still increasing every month. The number of people we're employing beyond the number of people entering the workforce, a very good sign. how low can we go? It used to be that the Federal Reserve and other economists would say that, you know, a natural unemployment was 5%. And we got down to 4%. And then, well, it's actually lower than that. Now, economists don't seem to know where the bottom is. How low can you go? And is it bad to get to 0? Is it bad to get to 1%? No one seems to know. As a matter of fact, the classic formulation, I'm going to get to you in a moment, Jim. A classic formulation is once you start getting low in unemployment, I'll go back to this one. Low in unemployment, inflation would be triggered. And I have a slide on this later on, but let me cover that now. And that is that there was an economic principle that once you reach a certain level, inflation would go high, and then the Federal Reserve, using its powers in terms of the size of the money in circulation, would increase interest rates, slowing down the economy so that employment would start increasing so that you wouldn't experience the problem of high or runaway inflation. But now the Federal Reserve, or at least the chairman of the Federal Reserve, has taken that there is at best a weak correlation, between employment and inflation. So that may be broken. And it may be broken for both. Why would it be broken? Well, if businesses believe that inflation will remain low, they're less likely to test it out by making major increases in the cost of goods and services out of the fear that their competitors could either keep their products unchanged in price or have a smaller increase in pricing. So it's more of a kind of like a psychological expectation that prices will remain within a certain band. Jim, you had a question.
Mike, do you think that our low labor participation rate is contributing to low unemployment and low wage inflation?
Question, what about our labor force participation rate? How many people are actually looking for a job? And that has gone down in the last 30 years. And some say that you really, with a part of the population out of the employment area, that you're not really truly measuring what unemployment is or employment is. And those people can be people who have retired early, retired and gone on disability or other safety net services, use of their own resources, just retired early and took their own resources and invested in themselves. Can be men or women leaving the workforce for purposes of caring for others, including children and parents and other members of the family. We don't know, but one of the things is this correlation, this pretty strong correlation between low unemployment and inflation seems to be at least suspect now.
The thing that surprises me was because there's been wage increases, and if people if they can find another job that pays more, once a couple of sources I've looked at is, one thing, people are staying in the workforce a little longer, and the other thing is they're actually hiring people that were never able to get jobs, people that are ex-cons and have, like some kind of drug records or something. They're actually getting some jobs because the manufacturers and some of them, it's hard to find labor.
Yeah, the point is made that people are staying in jobs longer. Employers in a low unemployment economy is reaching out to people that they normally wouldn't hire, including people who are ex-felons, people who are underskilled from what they would like them to have, and actually it's had a good benefit to people who are ex-felons getting into the workforce, minorities getting more into the workforce. So there may be a good social cause, a social benefit by keeping that number low. So this is a big story and we still are keeping an eye on it. Okay, let's move on. One final PS on this. Low inflation is not just in the US. It's in other countries as well, but for different reasons. For some reasons, but not all the reasons. Usually if something like oil spikes, it affects everyone, right? It affects consumers and affects industrial facilities. All prices tend to go up. When commodities, such as iron and the rare earths go up, appreciably that can have an inflationary effect. But for the most part, the world is staying with low inflation, with some notable exceptions, including in Venezuela, in which that economy's meltdown. It has nothing to do with the underlying economics that we've been talking about. Okay, let's move on. We haven't had big strikes in America for a while. The UAW has, yes?
Just one question. Is there some place we can look to find a statistic in the unemployment of how many people are working 2 or more jobs?
Oh, yes. Well, 2 or more, I'm not sure. There's an underemployment. The Fed puts out regularly an index of underemployment, and underemployment includes people that say they would work more hours if they could. And I'm sure in that series they may have some of the input may be exactly how many jobs do you hold, how many hours do you work from how many employers. UAW doesn't still look good for them. It may be one of those big structural fights in which the employer is going to stick towards to the number they want, the economic number they want to achieve, and try to break the strike, break the union's will. Because the union pays, what was it, $200, $250 in strike benefit to employees that would get $1,000 a pay period, $1,000 a week versus $250. It doesn't take a very long strike to go through your savings. They have basic issues they haven't yet worked through. Okay, let's move on. Let's move on. This seems to be a headline from 30 years ago. Employers moving away from traditional pensions. But it's just from the other day. General Electric is talking about ending pension accumulation after a certain date. And that is, you have the number of years of service and the benefit for only the work he has done up to a certain date, and then afterwards your eligibility for benefits for traditional pension would go away, and probably some type of cash payment would be given to you that you can be put into a 401k. In California, last time we talked about how the governor was going to sign the independent contractor bill. He signed it. The bill seems to have a major impact in certain sectors of the California economy. A lot of uncertainties, a lot of variations between businesses and exemptions that were granted to one business or another. This is the type of legislation that usually takes a couple of years to work through with cleanup legislation and others. But a good example of why there was a push for this, other than the state Supreme Court decision that basically said the California method of defining independent contractors violated the California Constitution, has to do with the so-called gig economy. Someone would take a job, not necessarily as a full-time profession, but perhaps as a full-time profession, and have that for either a short period of time or a long period of time, a lot of variations. Well, recently, Uber in a lawsuit said they had no drivers as employees. And under the new California rule, both the one that was done by the Supreme Court and the new legislation, that you cannot contract a principal portion of your business. A principal portion of your business. So it would seem that what is Uber then? What is a ride-hailing service? Is it just the interface between the customer and the independent contractor? Or is it a transportation company getting you reliably from point A to point B? And we'll see a lot of fighting on that in California, in not only the Uber area, but other areas in which independent contractors is a principal portion of the workforce. A lot of headlines and lawsuits and state initiatives on this, referendum on this. Okay, let's move on. Financial markets, 5 days up 1%, year to date up 18%, 1 year up 7.83%. So the market goes up, it goes down, is so far I think in very good positive territory. However, in addition to October being the month of Halloween, it is traditionally the month of greatest stock market negative volatility. It doesn't always happen, but when it has happened, it has been devastating. And some financial analysts tried to figure out why this quarter. Yeah, you have to pay corporate income taxes every quarter if you're a business. So you have money going out, and so your dividends may go down. But why October? No one has quite figured out that, but we'll see if that will happen. Also, businesses are going to start reporting this week and the next couple of weeks, well actually next month, on their quarterly reports. The financials are the first ones out. The banks, there was mixed reports from that, from the financial sector today about how their businesses are doing. One of the changes from past quarters has been the reluctance of corporations to predict how they were going to do. And usually that isn't seen as a good indicator, but we'll see in the next few weeks. Here's a cautionary tale. And that has to do with what's known as IPOs, initial price offerings. And this may seem esoteric to many of you, but let me try to bring it into focus. Initial price offerings, how a privately held company, a company without public investors, a company that's not traded on the major exchanges, go from a private company to a public company, how they get more cash into their business by the selling of stock. And oftentimes before these businesses will go public, they'll have a number of private offerings, in which they will sell portions of their business and try to project from those private offerings how much the business is worth. For example, if someone gives you sell 2% of your business for $1 million, it would suggest your business is worth $50 million. If you work the math on it. So you go and say, I'm going to sell half of my business on the stock market, $25 million. You go to a mortgage banker or others and say, help me do this. And they come up with a package and a price and make the required filings with the Security Exchange Commissions and state departments and corporations where it's done through a different method, in which they make disclosures. Well, a company that was flying very high, WeWork. Have you ever heard of WeWork? WeWork. It was one of these companies in which you could come in and rent a desk, rent an office, in which you would get services there, internet services, maybe coffee area, have coffee, soft drinks, area maybe to meet. And if you were a national business or a growing business that you didn't want to sign a long-term lease, you could sign a short-term lease with WeWork, and you could expand the number of people in their space without having to take out long-term leases. And one large Japanese company, financial company, invested heavily in WeWork. And WeWork started to fly high, estimated between $20 and $40 billion, even though it had never made any net profit, even though their S1 or prospectus filing had really no clear pathway to a profit. It was, well, Amazon made it, we can make it, for years without it. And WeWork crashed when companies discovered, analysts discovered how weak it was, and how the founder, now this is all reportedly, so I don't want to, I want to put this allegedly, the founder allegedly went out and registered the name We, and then sold it to his company for $5 million. He went out and bought it, then he bought property, and then he leased the property to the company. And then he took money out of it. So these initial price offerings have become very, very, under the microscope now. WeWork office suites. There's WeWorks in Santa Ana. There's WeWorks, and here are just the WeWorks in Orange County. Mostly in South County, down in the Irvine area. But you can see you can get a private office for $850, a hot desk, meaning it's not your own desk. Just means when you come into the office, come into the WeWorks office suite, if a desk is open, you take it and connect up your computer, what have you, here in Orange County. So thanks to WeWork, the whole IPOs are somewhat chilled because other investors are starting to say, maybe we should read more about the economics. One analyst pointed out that this is a good example of our security laws actually working for the benefit of the investor. If this had gone beyond the initial price offering, if it had gone actually to being sold to the stock sold to underwriters who then sold it into the public markets, the loss in valuations would have inured to the investors. Now it is boomeranging on the offerers of this, with tremendous decreases in market value. Now WeWork is selling off assets, trying to get out of leases. At times, they would come into a building, such as in New York, and lease, a long-term lease, 2 or 3 floors of a prestige office building, and then they've essentially sublet those out, or put in some services and stuff. But the value of their, of how they priced their asset was more valuable than the entire building they were in. So some thought that was funny math.
Actually, this is just on a smaller scale, where companies open up their headquarters in like Delaware or Nevada, so because you get a break on your tax rate. And for a small, person like a one-man shop or a two-man shop, you get the address of a prestige address in Manhattan or Newport Beach. I mean, I could see where that would work, but I mean, you know, like if the guy, if he's making all the money on it, you could be suspicious, but to me, it sounded like it was a good concept, but, I mean, and when you have a meeting, you know, these people come in, you got one or two products, they come in, you have a nice little conference room and a really nice.
Yes.
And, you know, you got, they usually have like a secretary in the front, and they, you know, and.
Music and nice artwork.
Everything nice and everything like that, so you're.
Yeah. Rich was talking about how, you know, that the business concept, maybe not the financial concept, makes a lot of sense. And that's what some analysts said. This was not a $40 million business, maybe $40 billion business, maybe a good $5 to $10 billion business. And getting the number right before you offer it to investors, and including pension funds. Okay, let's move on. Okay, consumer news. Hey, good news. Social Security checks are going up. The number is not that great, 1.6%. Why? What does 1.6% represent to you? That's the level of inflation, national inflation, the increase. Because remember, Social Security is a benefit that is closely tied to inflation. Now the average, I think the average benefit will go up just a few dollars. I think overall it is the average monthly Social Security payment for a retired worker will be $1,503, $1,503, and or a $24 a month increase. Nothing to write home to mother about, but it's going up in January. What is still up and very high, and will eat through that $24, is the high price of gasoline. This is as of yesterday. Orange County is in blue. California is in red in price per gallon. And then the national average is in green as of yesterday. National average for the lowest grade of non-leaded gasoline, 2.62 per gallon, versus here in California and Orange County, about what, 4.21? So that brings up, why?
I paid $2.19 in Texas 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, why? Yeah, when you get closer to the Gulf ports and the refineries down there, it does get lower, and you get to some of those low tax states and it gets lower too. So, well, one reason is that we have this special blend of gasoline during the summer months, so that air pollution is reduced from what it would be if we used a national blend. That costs money to do, and no other state uses it, so it is only made in these refineries in California. So, and there hasn't been major new refineries in California in many years. So, and as you can tell from this chart of California refineries, they're less than 10 produce more than 90% of all refined gasoline in California. So you have, you know, a limited number of refineries and very little competition, allegedly, between the refineries. Therefore, the cost they add in the refinery process is one that is not competed for. We also have, when any of those refineries shut down, the demand doesn't shut down, and the refineries just barely keep up with demand in California. So when they shut down, the price goes up. They can charge a higher price in California. And there's a brand premiums. Some studies have shown there's a major difference between the brands, such as Chevron, and the independents, though the gasoline is very, very similar. Very similar, according to these same sources. And we have added a lot of charges and taxes to the price of both refineries and distribution and at the pump. That increases it.
I think the state pollution charges are really small. The refineries use that as an excuse. Do you know how much it is?
No, I don't. But that is one that is frequently cited as a reason. And we have the second highest gasoline prices in the nation, or taxes in the nation. Well, prices and taxes. With a 53.5 cent per gallon state gas tax, and 28% of our roadway has been rated as suboptimal, or 28, the fifth highest in the nation. Now, there's been a lot of controversy of late regarding the recent gas tax increase. How much is actually going to roads? And there's been a lot written about that. The governor has defunded 3 specific highway projects and transferred the money, or proposed to transfer the money for shortages in rail operating funds, which is permitted under the state tax measure that increased the gas prices. But he's getting a lot of heat on that, including from members of his own party. And I wouldn't be surprised if the California Transportation Commission will reject what he's done, which they apparently can, reject the deprogramming of specific projects. Okay. Oh, by the way, who has the highest gas prices? Pennsylvania. And what's notable about Pennsylvania?
They produce oil.
Huh?
They produce oil.
And wasn't one of the first oil wells in America came in Pennsylvania? Well, that tradition. But their roads is in a little bit better condition than ours. So,
They have heavy winter, they have bad winters.
they have very bad winters there, and so the roads would even be worse, right?
Yeah, if you don't fix the highways,
Yeah.
you're gonna be out of office.
Yeah, Pat and I went from Pittsburgh to Philadelphia. We took that road trip one time during the summer, but yeah. A lot of different conditions in Pennsylvania. Have you heard about this? How many of you have been on a cruise in your life? Okay. Have you ever felt like you wanted to riot? This Norwegian ship, some passengers actually did, and because they had video cameras, right, in their phones, they tweeted it out. They were unhappy. They were on a 14-day cruise because of bad weather. They kept canceling where they were going to go to, and the toilet stopped working, other things, and there was one of the first passenger riots. They didn't take over. It wasn't a mutiny. They didn't take over the ship. But I'm sure that cruise ship line wished they never had had that. Let me see. I think I have a little video shot of that. Let me see if I can get that going.
I hear the passengers, including Americans, demanding refunds while still on the cruise ship. Here's Maggie Rulli.
Tonight, revolt on the high seas. Hundreds of passengers on the Norwegian Spirit furious after they say their cruise of a lifetime turned into a holiday from hell.
We're not answering or doing anything for anybody.
It was supposed to be a 2-week mystical fjords cruise, leaving from Southampton, England, for ports in France, Holland, Iceland, Scotland, and Ireland. Instead, passengers say after high winds forced the ship to cancel the first 2 stops, it headed to Norway. But passengers couldn't get off. One of the towns was closed to tourists. The next stops in Iceland and Scotland also reportedly canceled. Norwegian offered 25% off their next cruise instead of a full refund. Passengers were livid.
David, in a statement, the cruise apologized, saying they only skipped 1 port and they would not confirm passenger accounts. Instead, they're blaming the revised itinerary on bad weather, saying their priority remains the safety of the guests and the crew. David?
All right, Maggie, thank you.
Well, I think most of us who have taken a cruise would not want to go into an unsafe area. I remember we had a cruise in which we were going to go to the Normandy beaches. I mean, the port by Normandy, Le Havre, and we had a lot of World War II veterans on that ship, and we never got there because of a hurricane had, the tail end of a hurricane had come by, and we had to reverse our course and went by. That does happen. Anyway, let's move on. Streaming wars. This is one of the big consumer disruptions of our decade. Will be how more and more people will go from cable packages to streaming services. You may not think you will, but how many of you thought you would ever pay as much as you do for your cable bill? How much if you thought 10 years ago you would be paying what you are paying now, let alone 20 years ago? We're now in the midst of a big streaming war with more options than ever. Remember, streaming is different than getting video programming from your converter box. Video programming from your converter box comes on generally a coaxial cable, comes into the converter box. The spectrum of light and electricity within that is divided up into certain channels and provided to your viewing. Well, an internet-provided service basically takes you to the internet portal and grabs the video and either downloads it to you or streams it, one frame at a time to your house. And devices have made it, smart TVs allow you to go between one and the other without thinking about it. But the streaming wars have begun. Netflix starts out way in advance of everyone. Amazon also has a big advantage, but Disney is coming in now. Disney will be the big disruptor. Disney with their library of movies and new programs they will develop. Disney that owns ESPN, bundling ESPN, portions of ESPN with them is coming in. HBO is going to offer HBO Max with a Time Warner library of movies and special programming. NBC Universal is coming out with their Peacock network as a streaming service. Apple TV is going to start later in just a few months with the start of their programs, in which they're not going to provide a library, they're just going to provide a few good and original programs that for people that buy new Apple hardware this year, you'll get that service for a year for free, kind of like using the Amazon Prime model. And the LA Times on Sunday had an article in which someone did all the generally available streaming services and discovered they would pay $423, I think it was, if they took every one of them. Some, like Universal, may have ads in them. They may be priced so low that they make up the revenue in a traditional broadcast way by having ads, and maybe with an ad opt-out like CBS All Access does. You can buy it for one price with the ads, another price without the ads. Some examples of how much they're being offered for. Netflix at the low tier $8.99, the high tier $15.99, and Hulu at $5.99 without ads, $11.99. $5.99 with ads, $11.99 without ads. Amazon Prime, of course, that's included in the $119 annual Prime membership. But if you want to buy it separately, $8.99 a month. So that doesn't seem to be a great buy. It's entire Apple TV will be $4.99. Disney, $6.99 for the basic package, and they'll all have ones that will be upgrades. CBS All Access at $5.99. With ads, $9.99. Without ads, Peacock, they haven't announced how much that would be. That's the NBC one. HBO Max at $14.99 plus. And of course, Showtime and Stars are available through your cable provider, and also apart from the cable providers on the streaming services. So a lot is happening in terms of streaming. And the talent in Hollywood, both the acting talents and the directing talents and the writing talents are in great demand now, because you have all these streaming services wanting to get the next Game of Thrones on their service. Very big talent war going on now. Still, the library of refunds still make up, reruns, broadcast television still make up a major part of the revenue stream for these streaming services. And now, as different entertainment groups come out with their own streaming service, they're yanking back services they used to license to Netflix. And they're treating Netflix like they used to treat their competitors, like CBS. You don't find a CBS ad on NBC. None of those companies allow their competition to come on. What we're also finding is that DVD sales are going way down now, because why get it on DVD when you can get it immediately streamed to you, rented? Well, some people will. We still have vinyl records, but that is disrupting the DVD industry. Okay, let's move on. Well, you know, Sears went into bankruptcy, then they came out of bankruptcy, and now they're closing more stores. So it's the traditional retail dead cat bounce, in which they come out and they had it looks like it can be good at least for a while, and then they flop and die. Part of it, if you look at the store count, continues to go down, and the number of stores open from Sears for about 700 now down to a couple hundred. The share of sales, remember Sears used to be so big in appliance sales, and of course with less places to sell them, they have gone way down in appliance revenues. Fry's, how many of you spent any amount of time in Fry's in the last 20 years? I did. One of my favorite places. I always thought that was a cool kid place for nerds. And now Fry's looks like they're experiencing tremendous difficulties. And one example of that is that they're asking their suppliers to provide the items on a consignment basis. Meaning that you put your products into our store, and you don't charge us for doing that. I mean, we don't have to buy your product. And if they sell, we get a percentage of it. Or you give us a consignment charge for the right to be on our shelves, and you get all the revenue. I mean, it's not clear what their model is, but generally what happens is that major companies say, no, we're not going to come into that. And the smaller companies say, well, what happens if you go bankrupt and the stuff is still there? We may have a problem. Or if we have too much stuff out there and it's not being sold, we're going to have a lot of dead inventory coming back to us. So Fry's is in some trouble. Bed Bath & Beyond closing 60 stores. New CEO expected. I think those two may go hand in hand. Forever 21 bankruptcy signals a shift in consumer taste. I didn't know a whole lot about fast fashions until recently. Are you familiar with the term fast fashions? Fast fashions, apparently, is that you get the latest styles in fashion aimed at a demographic group, like young people or young urban people. And you rush that out to the stores, and you price it low enough that if you wear it 6 or 8 times, that's enough. And then you can throw it away and wait for the next fashion to come out, a fast fashion. And that's the sector of the retail space that Forever 21 was occupying. Not only do they go for the young folks, but also for people that like the fast fashions. And because their markup was low, they had big stores so that they could sell a lot of volume. But they're getting disrupted. And who could disrupt fast fashions? Fast internet fashions, in which you go onto a website, you put in your size, and you order off the fast fashion website, and it goes to Vietnam, China, wherever the product is manufactured, and it goes directly to you. You don't have to pay the leases at the shopping centers, and you pocket the net amount of money. So fast fashions probably will continue. One of the unfortunate outcomes of fast fashions, they aren't made to last, and they end up being disposed of. They are contributing a lot to. They have a big carbon footprint if you're an environmentalist, and it goes into mostly landfills. Okay. Global consumption of apparel and footwear, millions of tons expected to have heavy environmental stress, basically almost doubling in the next 15 years, and the carbon footprint they have. Simon Property Group, which is an owner of a lot of regional malls and also outlet centers, is decided that they need to expand their product list offerings or brand offerings by now including some online, that you can get some of these, you don't have to go out to the outlet center. You know, we have one out by us in, where is that, not Lake Havasu. Elsinore, Lake Elsinore area, yeah. To go, you just go onto the website and order the products. Just as AMC announced the other day, AMC, the big movie conglomerate, that they're now going into a streaming service too. They have their own streaming service that will be movies that just came off of the theatrical run. Same movies you could get, you know, on so many other services, but they'll merchandise it to their customers and give them certain credits on, you know, ticket sales and what have you. Now, what about the non-fast fashions, those that cost a little bit more than $20 or $30? Some retailers in some of the more affluent areas are now offering an easy pay installment plan to buy that sweater, to buy that clothes. Why, you know, why not have the $200 dress? If you can have it in four easy installments for $50. In effect, you're leasing the dress. You know, it will be good for at least 4 months. You lease it for $50 and be a big hit. Okay, let's move on. Personal finance. Wall Street Journal reports that while interest rates are going down, guess what's going up? Well, interest rates, corporate interest rates done through the Federal Reserve System or stimulated by Federal Reserve, the consumer interest rates on credit cards are still going up. One, because the cost of bad, you know, people not paying, and also they keep adding services to it. You know, it used to be, you know, airline miles, or, you know, 1% back, or 1.5% back, or 2% back. Well, guess how they get that 1 2% back by increasing the interest charges. So the average percentage rate on interest charging credit cards, look how it's gone from under 14% to over 17% in just 2 years. How many of you use your phone or your tablet for personal banking? Okay. Okay, no, you can be proud. You're kind of hip. Well, more and more people are. Banking apps are becoming more and more popular. Look at the high percentage. 40% of phone users check balances or transactions. 20% pay bills. 20% deposit a check. I'm very proud. I got a check the other day, and my wife and I received the same check for the same service for a different reason. Hers is still waiting deposit. Mine was deposited within 30 minutes of receipt online. Then I forgot which account I put it into, and I thought I couldn't get deposited. But I found that one in my money market account, not my general checking account, but that's okay. More and more you'll see younger people, because they tend to start these trends, paying directly from their phone, transmitting cash from their phone to another person. I did that for the first time the other day. I was getting my monthly haircut, which my wife always snickers at, beard trim, and close shave. And discussion with a 20-something-year-old. My annual youth therapy the other day. And I used my Apple Pay system. So you go on, and part of the Apple Pay, and there are many services like this, you basically, in my case, I transmitted the money by text message within the Apple the Apple system. So how does that work? Well, I open my wallet, my electronic wallet, with my brand new heavy-duty Apple card. I had $63 in cash balance. Cash balance is what you get when you use the card to buy things, and it gives you, depending upon what you're buying, between 1% and 3% of the value. So I had $63. I sent to Kristen $50. I quickly displayed that to my wife when I got home, if she ever wanted to go through my phone and who was Kristen. It showed up like this with the purpose of it, and it was done. It was done. Now, I'm not saying you should do that. I'm just saying that many people are doing, and young people are doing it. There's a lot of things that can go wrong. Consumer Reports has a very good video. If I had more time, I would show it. I actually have it, but I don't have the time to show it. On the things that can go wrong. You send it to someone you know. You send it for a service or a product you know you're going to get or you've received. You use a known service and not a new service, and other things to make, but it really is convenient. Okay, moving on. Auto sales, a big part of the American economy. Auto sales is starting to go down. Maybe it's because our recovery is getting towards the end, maybe not, but auto sales are going down, and almost across the line. GM down 0.8%, Ford 3.8%. Look at those imports, however, they're doing well. Expect a tariff on them. But some of them were made in America. Can't put a tariff on American-made. But more and more Americans are buying cars on these long interest loans. They're interest-bearing loans. Look at the auto loan terms now. 85 or more months. Look at that. You know, you have, what is that, about 20% now, 85 or more months? 73 to 84. Just look at, you know, the old, 3-year car loan. So many times you come off of those loans, you still owe money. I mean, you don't, when you sell the car, you trade it in, you still owe money. You don't have a residual balance, you have a residual debt. It's like selling a house in which you haven't paid off all the loans yet. Sooner or later that will hit the auto business because you just can't keep extending it out and out and out. But one reason why you see those long-term loans is look where auto dealers are getting their profit. They're getting increasingly their profit from the sale of financing and insurance rather than the actual sale of the product. Now almost over 30% of cars that are traded in have a negative equity. And just like the mortgages that were done to people who were underwater or people that were of high credit risk, these auto loans are packaged and sold off to investors. So the dealer gets rid of those loans, or the person that initiates the loan gets rid of that loan, sells it to a third party that then takes on the loan and then sells it to investors. Sooner or later that may crash. Okay, some housing stuff. Santa Monica many cities enacted local laws regulating short-term Airbnb type of occupancy. Some thought the courts would look unfavorably to those. A good test was in Santa Monica. The initial court reviews is no reasonable regulation of those types of businesses is constitutional. LA does not have as stringent ones, and there's been some concern about sellers or property owners being restricted. Good news in August, the number of new homes being built nationwide went up appreciably. Bad news in California, rents keep going up and up and up. 5.6% in 1 year. Some analysts have written, is the California apartment rental business broken in terms of its constructing new units? Until this last couple of months, there was a lot of editorials and a lot of op-ed pieces on can politicians do anything about housing? And now, watch out what you wish for, because this past session of the legislature has done a lot. We'll see what happens, what will be the outcomes. Used to be that you would solve one problem or address one problem and another problem pokes out. A classic example that you put rent controls in and then supply goes down. Okay, take rent control off, supplies remain the same. Okay, we haven't solved that problem yet. But you can do this whack-a-mole game. Well, governor signed a bill that does a statewide cap on how much rents can go up to a maximum 5% plus cost of living. So if cost of living is 1.6%, that would be 6.6%. Will that solve the problem? Some say maybe, maybe not. It certainly won't produce new housing. But if you're in an apartment complex now, it's predictable pretty much what the maximum rent increase will be. Wall Street Journal didn't think much about that. World's dumbest housing policy. Some have said, well, now that there's a rent cap, it will just encourage landlords to go up to it every year so that they don't lose out. Others say, well, there still is market demand, so people that do that, landlords that will do that, may have less demand. We'll see. We won't really know for a few years what happens. Governor also signed a bill that essentially allows homeowners to put bedrooms in their, not only their backyards, through more granny flats type things, accessory dwelling units, but also in their garages, and independently rent those or lease those out. Companies are coming onto the market with both prefab backyard dwelling units, such as these individuals, that they can essentially assemble in just a few days in the backyard, and you could rent out. This story was in the LA Times. This guy is actually an actor. This is not a low-income person, but they said this could also be a solution for providing some permanent shelter for homeless people. He lives in a, what is this? How many square feet? 80 square feet pod. I mean, or at least his bed is in this pod. Give you a better look at that. And what they have done is subdivided units into a number of pods with common living areas and kitchens, kind of like very small dormitories. San Diego moves to allow tiny houses. Here's one in which you just kind of just roll onto the property as a way of dealing with housing. The Orange County Register columnist on real estate and finance matters said, to deal with affordability, someone will pay for it. Someone has to pay for it. It's either going to be the property owner, the tenant, the government, the taxpayer. Someone will have to pay for it. We can't solve the issue. Someone pointed out to me one of the fastest growing areas in Southern California for new housing is out in Fontana, is out in Banning and Beaumont area. But the cost of getting to the job is borne by our highway system, right, in part. They're one on the freeways longer, but there's more freeway congestion starting earlier, so that there's a public cost that eventually occur. Okay, let's talk about health in our remaining 5 minutes. Today is the start of two things, is Medicare enrollment begins and Covered California begins. California is the Affordable Care Act exchanged in California. The Medicare enrollment period is for the rest of us. 60 million Americans are in Medicare. How many of you actually kind of compare and shop during this time? Okay, 3, 4, 5. How many of you receive literature and emails and phone calls now? Yeah. The Kaiser Family Foundation found that just 11% of Medicare Advantage enrollees voluntarily switch plans each year. Another study conducted in 2013 found that 13% of Part D enrollees switched voluntarily. Another half of those who did switch plans cut their premiums at least 5%. there's a reason for shopping that you should consider around this time. And if you're not in a Medicare Advantage plan, I particularly think that there's a compelling case to be made, at least in terms of the prescription drugs, the Part D benefit, to make sure that, one, the drugs covered that you use is covered within the plan, because they can change every year, and that the cost of getting those, that plan. Medicare rolled out just the other day and announced in time for this enrollment period. Services came out from the Fed. We just updated the Medicare Plan Finder with 2020 ratings for Medicare health and drug plans. Star ratings help you compare the quality of health and drug plans as you review coverage options. The more stars, quote, the more comprehensive the plan is, but likely the cost too, how more costly too, but not always. One of the changes this year, a couple of changes. One change has to do with Medicare Advantage. More items can be included in a Medicare Advantage plan. Medicare Advantage, remember, is essentially, it's Medicare Part C. It's basically Part A and Part B, and oftentimes Part D included in those plans. Kaiser Permanente Medicare is a good example of a Medicare Advantage plan. So that they can provide more services, they can charge more too. So, I mean, the other major change has to do with Part D. And the cost of Part D coverage on drugs for many people will actually go up this year. The cost will go up. Not only the premium, but the out-of-pocket cost will go up. So that Medicare, I mean, Social Security, what, $24 will not go very far. If you look at the one example, you can see that it just goes up in this example, $20 in the deductible, let alone and the various other areas. Growing rate in the annual out-of-pocket threshold before the catastrophic coverage comes in on Part D is going up to $63.50 from $5,100. That's one big jump. That's $1,250. That's a gigantic jump upwards. This gives you another example of in 2020, the basic plan, that is the company providing the Part D, they will pay about 32% projected versus 35% current year. And enrollees will have a bump of up to about 4%, should you get to the top area. If you don't get to the top area, a much lesser impact. Okay, let's just end there with that happy news. So, check out your Medicare, check out your streaming services, budget your $24 increase, average increase in Social Security. Watch out for cruise ship mutinies. The trade wars have not ended yet. We're in an area of great uncertainty there. Be wary of your fast fashions, but know that just because Forever 21 is closing some of their stores, you still can go on the internet and get that fast fashion. And we'll talk more in a month. Thank you very much.